Morning.
Morning. Good. Excellent. Oh, well, you've all come back. I take that as a win. Thank you. I hope you had a good evening and it wasn't all taken up by case study work. No? Good. Excellent. So, just to give you an idea of how this morning's going to be structured, it's a bit longer, but just to let you know that there isn't an expectation. I'm getting a bit of feedback. I don't know if everybody can go on mute for a bit, unless you want to actually say something. Yeah, so in case you're afraid you'll be spending 4 hours staring at the screen, you're not going to 3.5. So we'll have an hour and a half, so about the same length session as we did yesterday, where we'll the case study work. Now, a little bit about data, we'll talk a bit about analysis, and we'll talk a bit about communicating findings as well. Then there's a little screen break. If you need a comfort break before that, that's fine, don't worry. But there's a little break there, and then we'll have a little bit of case study work, more about that. Then we'll come back together the last little bit. When we were all in the room, I could reliably land this course, and I did it without looking at the clock for years and years. So we'll just see how close I can get without looking at the time. Right, so this study work. Remember how we numbered the groups now? I'm going to say there must have been group 1. Nods to me if there was a group 1. Yes, there was a group 1. Somebody nod to me. So, anybody want to talk? I'm going to just grab a piece of paper and make a few notes. So, whoever's speaking on behalf of group 1, if you could come off mute and just give us a quick 5 minutes max on what you concluded your brief was going to be.
All right. I'm presuming I'm group 1. We'll just jump in anyway.
Yeah, go first then. Go first.
So I'm just going to go through the steps of part of our brief. So first part of it, why do you think Bob needs a plan? We determined that Bob Cratchit's company has no long-term strategy or aims for the business. So traditionally, it's a consistent, tried and tested approach to his business, very short-term, but that potentially needs to change, especially because he's considering handing over to the family. So in terms, he needs to start prepping the groundwork for them. He also, on top of that, needs to look at better leveraging of existing assets and capital to take advantage of potential opportunities in the area and how to capitalize it. An example of one of those opportunities being the rehabilitation of King's Lynn and the potential growth up to 10%. That's just one example. But the how, so how will Bob and us know we've done a good job? When the succession planning is clear and continuity of the business is ensured with a well understood and defined strategy, which all stakeholders are aware of and are bought into. Also, we will look at numbers. So, potentially if the strategies follow through, you would compare the numbers to the market and also the company's performance to the past, to their past performance. Who are our stakeholders? So Bob and his 2 kids will be them, our clear main ones. We discussed our boss being a stakeholder, really, because actually we've got to deliver for him. So for us, he's our stakeholder. And he seems to have some skin in the game, even though he's golfing. And then potential unknown stakeholders are the local planning office and communities. So, getting buy-in from them could be an important part of the strategy for the business. What are our data sources? So we had the great data sources given to us, but actually it's really about the housing market data that's available in the area. Planning data, so what is being planned, what has got approval in the past, what hasn't. That's essentially going to heavily guide what's available to you. Census data of the area as well. But that's the past. We also discuss how an economic assessment of the area in the future. So, what some independent assessments come with. What is in or out of scope? So we determined that what's out of scope is working farther afield or outside of the area. They are an established brand and company in the area. You'll be treading on other toes if we go outside. So that's out of scope. We're also out of scope is not going into specifics of what they're doing in that strategy. It's guidance and strategy. So we're not going to give them the nuts and bolts of it. In scope is potentially the change of the type of the business. So there was, Bob mentioning potentially looking at property trading. So how will we communicate our findings? So there'll be the methods of communication, which will be presentations face to face with potentially a white paper with some detail. However, what we'll communicate is a few options or routes for further strategy. So there isn't potentially going to be a one size fits all, and this is the absolute. It's what fits for them, and it will definitely be a discussion on the findings to establish that focus. And that's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. I just ran out of paper. I space on my little piece of paper. I should have had a bit of piece of paper, shouldn't I? This is a message for next time. Right, now I think the easiest thing to do, though this is slightly unfair because I've made Chris do a lot of the heavy lifting, is if we go to group 2 and thinking about what you've just heard, is there anything extra that you're thinking to cover? Or anything that you think, actually, you said that, we're not doing. We're doing something else. So who's talking for group 2?
That would be me. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I was listening to what Chris has said. Most of it covered what we had. I think the only additional thing we had was in terms of data sources, because they were planning on keeping local. We thought it might be an idea to send out on behalf of Bob's company a marketing research to the local area to find out kind of what they're after, what they think of the quality of Bob's houses, and whether they would want to live in like a rented accommodation or housing, just to get some kind of additional market research focused on specifically the questions we want to answer, rather than just like government data, which could be generic.
Yeah.
I think everything else was pretty much covered by Chris.
Excellent. No, that's good. Thank you. Is anyone going to?
I don't think we got as far as agreeing who was going to present.
On the basis that you're off mute, Jimmy, and just step in. So same brief as for group 2. Anything that you'd want to add, or things that you thought you would be doing differently? For group 2? Can you guys hear me? Yeah, you can't really. No. You have to do this through the medium of dance if you're not careful.
We just hadn't agreed who was doing it, so I'm just reading our notes but quickly to see if there's anything else we've got to add. Sorry, I'm struggling to hear you today, Stuart.
Now then, is that better? Perfect. Right. I tried this yesterday when we were setting up and it didn't work. So as long as you can all hear me.
That's much better. We'd got a couple of extra bits around. So we'd also gone with independent market research as one of our data sources. We put in crime statistics because we picked up on the emphasis on like safety and security for future residents. And then in terms of measured, we'd sort of included profitability, sales percentage, and growth for the future. And ultimately, Bob will be able to retire was one of our sort of planning goals.
Yeah, that's pretty key. That's kind of what's
I think you've gone again, Stewart.
right. Am I still there? Can you hear me? You can hear me. Sorry, I've stopped talking there, Jan. That was why you couldn't hear me. I was just muttering to myself. Yeah.
You broke up there, but I'm presuming you asked 3 groups. There was only 3.
Yeah. This is not great, is it? If this carries on being a problem, then I'll just dial in, I think. That's that. Slightly irritating, but there you go. I'm doing this for a year and there hasn't been an issue, so I don't really know why. Right. So, can we all hear me? Just wave if you can. Perfect. So that's all good. So thank you for that. A couple of extra thoughts for you. None of you mentioned interviews as a data source. So critical part of the process is to find out what people think. It is allowed to be a data source, even if it's small volumes. And particularly when you work in our sort of job, you get used to big data sets of regular data. Interviews are still a source. So it's sort of market research goes in that direction, but finding out what people want is a really important thing. I think the other thing, I sort of put the data stuff in really to see how far you'd go down that route, because it's a track. Remember, we were developing the brief, and I specifically said to you, don't think about the data. So if you could bear that in mind next time. Sorry, the birds are flying into my window again this morning, so if you hear any bangs, that's what it is. Next time you're doing this, please remember you're not thinking about the data. In and out of scope, how will you communicate findings? All of that's fine, but the data's in there as a trick. The other thing is, you were doing this together in a small group. Is that how you normally develop a brief? There's no reason why you can't do it as a group. I mean, I know normally you do it with your stakeholder, but actually having some analytically minded people together is really helpful when you're trying to think about how you're going to approach a problem and indeed what the problem might be. So my advice to you would be when you're starting a bigger project, particularly perhaps if you're new, let's say your first 12 months, and I know a couple of them qualify, think about one of your colleagues to sit with you while you're doing it. And they can ask you some good questions that'll help you think about the problem. I still now prefer to think of the problem with a colleague when I'm doing a new project. There's just a different perspective. You just get somebody else's point of view and you think, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. I've been doing this for 30 years. So if I can so thank you for that. What we're going to do in the next bit of case study work is we're going to pretend you've done the analysis. So you're going to have to hypothesize, I meant to say, the things that you've investigated, and you're going to be presenting back the results. We'll see how that works. And we'll do it in a different order so Chris doesn't have to go first again. Right, so same rules as yesterday. Particularly if you stop being able to hear me, then shout out. If you've got any questions or comments as we're going through, shout out or stick something in the chat. Jan will ride shotgun on the chat just in case I'm in the zone and I forget to read it. So today we're going to kick off by talking about data collection. Because I tricked you before and you fell into the trap, but I think it's an important area to talk about. What I'm not going to talk about is your data, because you know way more about that than I do. What I'm going to talk about is just one slide's worth of things for you to think about. What I would say is everything is potentially data now. When I started out, when I was a boy, I'm going to sound like your dad now, sorry. Photos, little bits of paper with ink on them. When you went on holiday, you would a load of photos randomly, and I say by load I meant 36, 24, and then possibly even 48 or 72. And then at the end of the holiday, you'd get an envelope, you'd put your photos, your film in the envelope, send it away, and then 3 weeks later you'd get back some thumbprints. Because what you'd get is a picture that was like this. But you wouldn't have known. And you didn't take 6 of the same thing just to make sure one of them was good, because you only had 36. So they certainly weren't digital. But now they are. And actually, we're looking at each other on a little screen in the comfort of our home on a device that probably costs less than £1,000. And weird, because actually there's a video stream that's digital. Intermittently, there's an audio stream as well, and that's digital. It is data. So particularly when you're in a company, as you guys are, where you're dealing with, you need to be thinking about non-traditional data sources. For sure, you've got things like things and payments and supply chain and all of those kind of things to think about. But actually, you've got security cameras. So do you use those to count how many people are in the vicinity? You've got audio from your call centres. Are you using that? You've got images of reviews that are set. They're all data. So what I would say to you is, and this is why it's so important to keep brief separate from the data, is if you understand the problem you're solving properly, start to ask questions about the data that you truly need. Now, you guys may not actually be able to access all of this data. I've lost count of the number of companies where I go in and the call centre data, yes, they record calls for training purposes. One place I went into about 2 years ago, they still use tape. And you think, oh, for pity's sake, you know, they were taking hundreds of thousands of calls a month and storing them on tape. And why were they even recording it? They never went back and listening to it unless there was a court case. If they'd done it digitally, it would have been cheaper and they could have used the data. So something I will observe is image technology has come a long way. Facial recognition is better than it was, but it's still a bit ropey sometimes. It needs us to be sitting like this, like we all are. So, on TV where they kind of get this sort of picture and they say, oh, could you enhance the image? And then suddenly they know who it is. Yeah, that doesn't work. But you can count people, that's fairly reliable. You of course have other attributes like speed, because you can count things like frame speed. So there are things you can learn. Audio is massively better. So voice to text used to be ropey, it's very good now. It's particularly good in English because there's lots of American companies that invest in it, all these little technology companies. But actually, I did a project a couple of years ago where we were stripping audio from YouTube videos that people had shot on their phones in Arabic. And although people say Arabic is a language, and at its root it is, there's quite a difference from, say, Morocco to Yemen. So the fact that you can actually strip that out and interrogate it off YouTube videos, which are shot on somebody's phone in their house with all of the ambient noise and all of these connection problems that we have, and you can still interrogate it and get meaning from it, should tell you, give you confidence that this is a really important source of data, and not just for sentiment. And you can actually get meaning out of it too. So to think about that when you're approaching your analysis, ask some difficult questions of your IT people and of your management, because if they're asking an important question and the answer is valuable, they might need to invest beyond just pulling the billing system data out. Okay? And that, I think, is really all I'm going to say about data. So my top tip, demanding. So let's talk a bit about analysis. So I'm going to start off, and this get your typing fingers ready. It's a little bit of audience participation here. It took 2 hours for 2 men to dig a hole 5 feet deep. How long would it have taken if 10 men had been digging? Sorry, how deep would it have been if 10 men had dug the hole for 2 hours? So 2 hours for 2 men, 5 feet deep. Now you've got 10 men. Right. So how deep would it be? Give me your first answer. I only have answers from people called Chris. No. It's not that hard. You could just use a single digit if you like, or 2 digits, or 3 digits, I suppose. That's how deep you think the hole will be. Right, so I think the consensus is 5 feet, but possibly much wider. Good question. And this worked much better, Jan, than it did face to face, because everybody guessed that it was a trick question. They always have. So clearly, online, you're all much more gullible. So be careful about internet scams, by the way. The answer is you have no idea. How many spades do these 10 men have? I didn't tell you that. How deep is the topsoil? I didn't tell you that. I didn't tell you how big the hole needed to be. You assumed 5 feet, but actually that's how much they dug in 2 hours. That's not necessarily what the brief was. Council roadmen. Has anybody got council roadmen as relatives before I say anything rude? My observation would be, however many there are on the job, there are only 2 working. So you could put 20 people in and it wouldn't go any faster. If it's at the junction at the end of our road. I also told you nothing about the extra diggers. Now, my dad rest his soul, he was not much of a digger in his late days. He would not have been much help. He could possibly have made me the tea, but that would have been about it. So, and I am less of a digger now than my lad is. Well, I can still dig about a hole, actually, more robust. So you made some assumptions and you didn't realise it. I would say be very careful. We have had people say things like 25 feet deep because you've got 5 times more men. It's like, well, great, but how are you getting the dirt out from the bottom? And it's a bit like that cartoon where they dig a really deep hole and then they realise they can't get out either. Because I didn't say you had a ladder either. So one of the problems that you will run into, and particularly if you've been in the job for more than about probably 2 years actually, is that you will make a whole load of assumptions you don't realise. And assumptions are both the friend and the enemy of an analyst. If you make an assumption deliberately, that's great. We call that hypothesis, if you remember. It even has a technical name. If you make it unconsciously, then you won't spot it. And whilst assumptions are informed by experience, the whole point of the analysis we do is not to look at the 70% of the time when something is correct. You know, the opportunities to be better are in the 30% where the assumption was wrong, where the model didn't fit. And so please ask yourself, what have I assumed to get to this point? What is it that I looked at and I thought, oh, do I really know that? Or is that what we believe? So the other thing that you will see a lot of in your organisation is stuff that people just know. That stuff is based on experience, but it is never 100% true. So please, 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 next time somebody asks you to do something, ask yourself, what are the assumptions I'm making? This is a life skill, by the way. So if you're driving anywhere after, at the weekend and to the supermarket, you'll come to a junction and there will be some assumptions at play there, like assuming that you stop, for example, or assuming the other person stops if you've got right. If you get it wrong, they drive into you. In analysis terms, if you get it wrong, you might lose 50 million or 5 million or 300,000, or it might make no difference at all. But if you're clear on assumptions, at least you go in forewarned, if not forewarned. So, imagination. Now, this is unleashing your creativity and your inner artist. I have no artistic skills, by the way. You will not be called on to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. What we have a little bit later, and we'll do this after the case study, is we'll have a little exercise in imagination, just to remind you. But one of the things I would say to you all is being an analyst, being a good analyst, is about having a good imagination. Because if you're going to fill up that blank piece of paper with your mind map, you have to be able to think. And you have to be able to think in the absence of perhaps any input, any facts. And so you have to be imaginative. You have to be able to think strange and random thoughts. This is, I mean, being, it's off the page. And sometimes you'll get slapped because you're off message, and really people are focused on the result and they don't want to think about this problem over here. But that's kind of your job, to be that person. As I said before, agent of change. You're a catalyst, and if you're really good, you'll be a terrorist. Because you go around blowing things up just to see if you can put something better in place. Although you have to do all that stakeholder management stuff. So, imagination. How does it work? I would say the place that it works least well is the place that you spend the most time. Because then you fall into all your habits. So when you're in the office, being imaginative is really hard at the best. Where you are right now, I think you'll find it really hard to do. Having a screen.
Stewart, your sound's got
Is it? Am I back? Can you hear me? You can hear me. Weirdly, now it says you can't, but there you go. Shout again if it fades. Sorry about that. So I don't know where I faded out, but I don't think you can be imaginative looking at a screen. I don't think you can be imaginative sitting in your lounge or bedroom or whatever, if that's where you always sit. I've always been a great believer in a bit of fresh air. Going for a walk around the block, just to free my mind, listen to the birds singing and crashing into my window. It'll be different for you. You might just like to sit somewhere quiet. You might actually like to have some music on. It might help. It might be the reverse. You might be able to be imaginative by putting yourself in the situation that you're trying to analyse, and actually it triggers you there. Whatever it is that works for you, find out what it is that works for you. And when you have to think, you have to explore a new problem, go there, do that. And it'll give you a much better quality of the process. I think the tyranny of the office is, I mean, you know what it's like. I mean, we saw it for years. We used to have conversations about it when I was at Eon and at Barclays. You'd see all these people who had fantastic, varied, rich lives outside of work. They'd come into work and they'd sit in front of the screen like we all are now. And you'd get naff all out of them. And you'd think, well, why can't they bring some of that creativity and passion to work? And the answer is because they're sat at a desk in front of a screen. You have to be excited about the problem that you're trying to solve. And so therefore you have to walk around the block, I think, or sit on your own for a bit, or listen to music, whatever it is that works for you, to get your brain working. So it's part of your job. It's incredibly naughty to go out from your house or from the office and go for a little walk around the block in the middle of the day when you're supposed to be working. But the point is, you are working. Because you're thinking about the problem that you've got. Take the dog for a walk. Go down and buy a bar of chocolate. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter, because what you're doing is just giving yourself the opportunity to think. It does count as work. Take your phone with you, because if somebody rings you and says, what are you doing? You can say, I'm thinking. Because I'm paid to. Most of your colleagues are too. Quite a few of them don't. So, what else do you think? So we talked about that. Paid to think. You are not paid to write code, fiddle around in Excel and do charts or PowerPoint slides. That is not why the company thinks you're valuable. For me, I think, oh, thank God for that, because I've always been rubbish at PowerPoint. Mine are functional PowerPoint slides. Some people's are a work of art. You guys, you know this knowledge economy people always talk about. We've all heard this phrase, yeah, the knowledge economy. Yeah, that's you. That's you. You're paid to think and generate knowledge. It doesn't matter where you do it. So anyway, I think quite strongly about imagination. Have children. When you have children, if you interact with children, just watch them play. Watch all that random association that's going on. With the little voices. Even if you see children walking past in the street, you see them skipping along, singing to themselves, and you think, what's going on in your head? Well, the answer is something else. They're not walking down the road by the side of a busy main road. They're off in some sort of fairy tale world. Now, I can't necessarily help you get to some fairy tale world, but what I will say is you need to get yourself in a zone to think, be excited. enough of that. Right, we'll come back to imagination. It is important. So, averages. Averages for me are down there with assumptions. They're useful, dangerous. So imagine that you're back in the office. So I don't know about you lot. I don't have a lot of air conditioning at home. So this little story doesn't really work when I'm at home. But when I'm in the office or somewhere else, it's fine. Because what you get with air conditioning is an average of 20 degrees because you've set it at 20 degrees, or 16 degrees because you've set it at 16. If you sat under the air vent in the office, you got 12 because it was damn cold. And in that little meeting room that they put in the front corner, by the act of putting up the little dividers, they'd cut off the air circulation. So in the summer, it was always about 45 in there. You had to leave the meeting room door open so that you didn't die. That's what averages do. The fact that the average woman is 3 inches shorter than the average man is an interesting fact, but tells you nothing about the fact that my sister-in-law is 6'1". Now, I can't say to you that that particular fact has any relevance, but what I would say is she has a less good experience with all of the heights that they've picked for shopping, selling to products that women buy, because they're at this eye line, and she's seeing all the men's products, which they put 3 inches higher. They typically put on the shelf above. Because that's the average. If you're thinking about things like the length of a bed, the average height is great. But what percentage of your customers do you want to have a bed that's too short? Being too short is almost more of a disadvantage than being too tall, because you kind of fold yourself up if you're a bit taller.
Can I just chip in there, Stuart, bearing in mind we're all whip-raised? The peephole indoors. In rooms, I have to stand on a chair that I can barely lift to look through that. I just wanted to have a little niggle. Thank you for the opening.
So I'm not sure we're here. I don't know if they're taking requests, Jan, but that exactly proves my point. Exactly proves my point. I could also say I've stayed in hotels, not Whitbread brand hotels, where the shower has not been high enough, and I am only 5'11". I'm not 6'8", and I just think, oh, for the love of God! So somebody short fitted it. That's all I can say. And I know he did the whole floor, and it would have been blank, I'm sure, on it, because otherwise it would have been even lower. But you just think, oh, for pity's sake, go on. Wish my sister-in-law was a plumber and she could have gone in and done the whole. Right. Anyway, so averages. What's the average hiding? It is hiding something. That's the thing that you're looking for, because that will be the grit in the oyster, or the grit in the experience for your customer, where the average doesn't quite work because Jan can't see out of the little spy hole, or she's too weak and feeble to push the emergency escape lever if there's a fire, whatever it happens to be. So let's talk about the difference between analysis and insight. So we're analysts, yeah, but analysis is the thing you do. Insight is the thing you generate. So let's start with this. This is real, by the way. This is a real problem. You have been told that customers or consumers worry about germs in the bathroom. So you get asked to do some analysis about where the germs are. So let's not worry about how you've done that. You do some analysis and you come up with an answer. Let's do it in the chat. You get one place you can name for the worst place for germs in the bathroom. So Or at least I know you can all hear me. Nice bit of variety there in answers. So the places where there are the worst germs are really fundamentally, I mean, assuming that you have a moderately clean bathroom, are all around the sink. So for those of you who said things like the tap, of course, the tap is the thing you touch before you wash your hands. It's also the area that's damp, and germs love damp, warm, damp places. If you'd have said your flannel, scarily, that would also have been quite right. Toilet handle, yeah, yes, you touch it before you wash your hands, but it's not wet, it's not damp. Well, I hope it's not anyway. So that's, yeah, so you say, okay, well, that all sounds reasonable. So what are we going to do? Let us launch a hands, remember we're in the home here, we're not in the hotel. So all of these really expensive contactless taps and things, they're out of budget. Also, we're an FMCG company, so we don't make those. So we design a little battery-powered soap dispenser, because the other place that germs grow is on soap dispensers, because they're wet and sticky, and it's all a bit horrible. And they sit there for ages, and you don't wipe your soap, and you typically don't wipe your soap dispenser either very often. So they got this little magical thing where you could battery pad, and you just bought the refills, like the little Carex ones you just shove in. Well, it wasn't Carex. And you wave your hand under it, you get your little bit of soap, and you go like that, and then you flick the tap on and wash your hands. It's all lovely. And if it's an antibacterial, you put the soap on your hands first, then you turn the tap on, then you sanitized your tap. How good is that? 2 for 1. So this company, and it was the brand was Dettol. I forget whether it was Unilever or the other one, but anyway, one of the big ones. So they launched it, and then they had to discount it, but they gave up. Didn't sell. Why didn't it sell? Answers on the chat quickly. Why do you think it didn't sell? It's absolutely addressing the problem of why didn't it sell? Very good, Jasmine. Any more? So yeah, that's marketing. Yeah, no. So they spent a lot of money on marketing. That didn't work at all. So Jasmine's the closest. It's because people didn't perceive that to be where the germs were. Now put yourself in your grandparents' heads just for a minute. Now, what's the dirtiest bit of the bathroom? Toilet. Give you the answer. Yes, thank you. So if that's the dirtiest bit of the bathroom, that's what you need the products for, yeah? And actually, if you go and walk around any supermarket, you will see an entire shelf full of cleaners. That would probably find 2 shelves. There's a whole range of products in your toilets. Question. Don't answer this one out loud. Please, God, don't answer this one out loud. How often do you put your hand down the toilet? I never do. Therefore, I don't care. I don't put my hands down there. The other thing is, designed to wash away. So they can't stay there anyway. Every time you wash it, it's sunscreen. Only there. And people recognise.
Sound's going, Stuart.
Right, how's that? I'll tell you what, let me look for. Right, I'm afraid that's the best you've got. Can you hear me now? Good. Right, yes. So the only bit that you can't see as clean as a consumer is where? Under the rim. That's why we have toilet duct. It's so you can clean under the rim. But if you don't put your hands down the toilet, how often do you put them under the rim? Never. You just don't. So it is a product of the consumer's worry, not reality. But it's the one that was successful. So the insight is that it doesn't matter where the germs are. It matters where people think they are. And they're not the same thing. So if you think about your data source, if it didn't include market research to ask people where they thought the germs were, you would miss it. And those poor people on Dettol product development completely missed that. They spent loads and loads of money on a product that should have worked but didn't. Now, the problem in high traffic areas is completely different, but then so are the economics of the solution. So if you think about somewhere like a railway station or an airport, there you can afford to have contactless taps and contactless soap and contactless hand drying. The reason for that, of course, is because you've absolutely got to cut down on the disease vectors. So there, you actually have to design to stop the spread of germs. But in the house, you're not selling to a rational person. So the insight is that it doesn't matter what the truth is. We've had an object lesson. Now, I've been using this example for a decade. In the last 5 years, we've had an object lesson in whether the truth really matters. So all I say is it also doesn't matter when you're doing analysis. It matters what people think. This is equally true for when you present the findings as well, and we'll talk a bit about that. Yeah. So germs lurk in difficult to get to places. I just, the whole idea of toilet duct, just, I don't know. And I buy it, and I still know, I know I'm solving a problem I don't have. Right then, okay, so hopefully there were some little insights there to stimulate your little grey cells next time you have a problem to solve. Let's talk a little bit about communicating findings. How are we doing for time? Right, I forgot what timeline I said we were on now, actually. But anyway, 10, I'm sure it'll be fine. Bit about communicating findings. So, hands up, including people who are not on camera at the moment. I'll imagine what your response is. Hands up if you use a lot of PowerPoint to communicate your findings. Hands up if you produce a lot of dashboards. So let's call it like Excel charts and bars and things like that. Yeah. So everybody in your audience is habituated to seeing that stuff. What did I say earlier when we were talking about imagination? Habituated as an audience member to see a certain thing, and therefore you're used to paying attention or not. If you've ever presented to a board person or even the whole board, the thing that you realise is it's really hard to hold their attention. It was hard before smartphones. It's really hard now. So sometimes you have to think about am I doing something because I'm used to doing it and it's convenient, or am I doing it because I'm trying to get an impact? So I think we are always presenting to get an impact. It's difficult with dashboards that you're producing every month because fundamentally you're saying, here's another month's worth of stuff, or here's another day's worth of stuff. So the question becomes, how do I have impact? Because if I can have impact, I will get a response from my stakeholder, which will generate action, which will generate the value, which right at the very beginning I said was the reason that you're here in the first place. So I've just noticed somebody made carpet on there. Don't have carpet in your bathroom, by the way. It's just a bad move. Anyway, sorry, I just seen it on the chat. So remember that whilst it's convenient to produce output in a familiar form, it may not be the most effective way. I can't remember when I normally tell this story, but I'm going to tell it now because it feels relevant. When I worked at Eon, it was around the time that David Cameron was doing that whole, oh, you know, we need to have, everybody should have little tiny windmill on their house. Some of you may remember that. So they were kind of like tiny versions of the enormous ones that you see on the hills. The principle's okay, but in practice they don't work. And they don't work for two reasons. One is, you know, most of us live on housing estates, and you know the way windmills work is that the wind has to blow on them, and if it's sort of getting thrown around by all the roofs and things, you don't get that nice clean flow of air. The other is that you screwed them onto the gable end of your house, which is the end wall, you know, the one with like the little triangle. Now the thing with the wind is when it blows, stuff in it vibrates, and windmills vibrate. And if they vibrate too much on a brick wall, they pull the wall down. So that happened a few times. So we have a technology that sounds great. It's a bit like contactless soap. It sounds great, but it doesn't work, unlike contactless soap, and it damages your house. But it was being promoted by the government at the time, and they used to have these green scheme. I mean, there's been several versions of the green schemes, but they used to have this green scheme where you got a subsidy for fitting them. And we've done some analysis that basically said they don't work. I used to have the market research reporting to me as well. So we've done the research on whether consumers liked them either, because they liked them if it was for them, they hated it if it was for next door. That was the other problem. So we had to present and say, actually, we think Eon should skip this small wind turbine thing and double down on dull stuff like loft insulation, because that really does work, and it's cost effective. But we knew one of the senior leaders absolutely wanted to do this wind turbine thing. He wanted Eon to be known for turbines, and we're thinking, oh God, no, that's not the worst thing. That's like being a hotel company known for dirty sheets, you know. You just don't want that. So we knew that he would be against us if we presented and said this was a stupid idea. And he was the guy who was running the energy efficiency team. So his view had an enormous amount of weight with the other board members, because some of them didn't care, some of them just wanted to do something cheap. You know, it's all extra cost to the business. So we thought, well, how can we do this? And one of my colleagues knew that there was a little eco-village just outside Nottingham. And some of you may even know of it. It's not generally open to the public, but you can get tours of it. Occasionally they're open to the public, and this is pre-COVID, so we were allowed to go in anyway. But we booked a session with those people, and I went over with my colleague who had the idea, and we had a chat with the guy who was going to run the tour for the board. And we sort of laid out our problem. And he said, yeah, completely get that. They're a waste of money. And he said, if we get the board to do a tour, if you cover all the big technologies and talk about them, and then finish on that, that'd be great. And he was like, yeah, that's no problem at all. And so we got the board over there, and we had like half a day. And we'd never have got half a day to talk to them about anything. But because we'd said, oh, do you want to come and look at this eco technology place? They were like, oh yeah, that would be good. That'd be good. So we got the man. He did the tour. The last sort of comment. He finished on the big turbine. They had one of the big turbines. And the last comment was the senior director turned to him and said, oh yeah, I see you've got the big turbine. We're thinking about sponsoring the little ones. And he said to him, I wouldn't bother, they're a complete waste of money and they don't work. Killed the idea completely. Because he was the expert, he said they didn't work. And he said it in front of everybody, having been around saying about all the other technologies that did work. It was way more effective than a bar chart, is all I'll say to you. So it doesn't always have to be Excel. It doesn't always have to be PowerPoint or the BI tool of your choice. So particularly if you've got a difficult finding to communicate, think about something else. Think of another way of doing it. So I've talked a bit about that, but I suppose the first thing you need to do is think about your audience. So we clearly were thinking about our audience there, but in a more general sense, you need to think about your audience. And I think I mentioned yesterday that people don't like surprises, they don't like change, they don't like surprises, and senior people particularly don't like surprises. So one of the questions, when you're doing your analysis, you have to find out what it is your audience is expecting. So they've asked you to do some analysis, they've got an expectation maybe of the answer, and more importantly, what it will require them to do. So do you know the answer to that question? What are they expecting? Are you really clear? And this is while you're doing the analysis. Are you really clear what you want to communicate? Because you really want them to do something as a result of the analysis you've done. So you've spent time doing analysis. You've arrived at an opinion based on the analysis. You think, I actually think we should do X. So if that's the thing I think we should do, I need to present that to them in a way that allows them to arrive at that conclusion too. If you're not sure and there are options, then that's the thing you need to communicate. But you need to be really clear what it is. You are not communicating that you found that the answer was 11. Because I don't care that the answer was 11. I'm not sure what that means. I need to know what to do. People are easy, even senior people, if you tell them what to do, half the time they do it. It's great. Board directors are generally less suggestible than others. It's just like a survival bias thing. But if you recommend something, suddenly what you've done is you've put the stake in the ground. Now, if they want to do something else, they have to argue against what you've recommended, and your analysis has led you to this conclusion. So, what do you want to communicate? How do you know they heard it? So, I have lost count of the number of times I have turned up for a presentation just before particularly market research agencies are bad for this, but just before they go on to the present mode, you look at the bottom left corner and it says slide 1 of 87. I have a thing I call the rule of 3. Let's say you've got an hour to present to your stakeholder. You probably want them to talk for 20 minutes because they'll be talking about what to do. So you've got 40 minutes. Divide that by 3, you've got about 13 slides maximum, less 1 or 2 at the beginning. People being slightly late and all that kind of general chit chat at the beginning of a meeting. You've got 12 slides in an hour. You've got 6 in half an hour. That's your budget. So if you're going to communicate, you need to make sure that your message is in those 6 slides. Because if you put 16, then they may remember something else. But also, you need to be able to get the audience to play back to you what you've said. So you need to think about the flow and how you're going to make sure that they've understood what you've said. Is that clear? That's one of the techniques. If everybody looks at you blankly, either the sound's gone off or they didn't understand. And you can tell by body, I mean, it's easier in a room, but you can tell by body language where you sort of look at people's faces. Now, at the moment, all your little faces are about, half a centimetre across. But when you're in the room, you can see people looking a bit puzzled. And you think, oh, okay, you haven't quite got it. So you have to think about that, but you have to plan it in. Because if you've got 15 slides or 20 slides, you haven't got time to stop and ask them what they think, because they might tell you and then you're not going to get through all your slides. And the last slide's the really important one, because it's the one that had the recommendation on it. So you have to think about these things. Yeah, and then the question becomes, is that good news or bad news? Are you finding something that's good for them, bad for them? It needs people to worry or not worry? What is it? What's the overriding emotion that they're going to feel at the end? Now, my top tip with board directors is whatever your results are, pre-brief them before the meeting, because they need to get that feeling, good or bad, out of their system. And you need to understand whether they're going to be on side in the meeting that you get to, because they're the stakeholders. Even if it's somebody less senior than that, that's still influential. It's worth pre-briefing them, because then they understand what's going to happen and they have a chance to prepare their own position, particularly if it's maybe not so favourable to them. Something they've done hasn't worked. So they need to work out the story. Or they maybe will ask you to find a little bit extra out so that they can kind of mitigate the bad news. Those sorts of things. If you're going to surprise people by saying, actually, everything you've been doing for the last year needs to change direction, and it's just because of my piece of analysis, not because of something in this pandemic, then that'll be a little bit of a surprise. It may be good, it may be bad. But you need to understand that's what they're going to feel. It will affect their response to you. So you need to kind of anticipate that and empathise and project yourself into their shoes to say, almost ask yourself the question, why would I want to ignore this? Why would I want to discredit this piece of analysis? Or just, why would I say it's not a high enough priority? If you can get yourself into those shoes and then you try and address that through your communication, then you'll get a better outcome. And that holds as true for a dashboard as it does if you've done a bespoke piece of analysis for someone. Because the thing with dashboards is they are like wallpaper if you're not careful. People just quickly flick it up, they look to see if everything's basically okay, and then they move on. And
Stewart,
that isn't exactly. Hello?
Just how would you pre-brief? So, like, what's the best way to do that? Because I've got quite a thing that's quite effective, but it's just, an email going, some bad news coming.
No.
Just
One-on-one, always one-on-one with senior people. Without any doubt, it's always one-on-one. And the reason for that is twofold. One is it's more effective because it allows you to have that two-way conversation, that you see how your message has landed and you can have a discussion about how to mitigate that effect when you go to the main meeting. But the other is that there's a degree of ego in senior management that require you to flatter it regardless of whether it's justified or not. You may think that the CFO is a complete idiot, but he is the CFO, or she is. We've just had a lady CFO appointed. The previous one was an idiot. Hopefully she's going to be better. The fact is, though, they expect a certain respect. So if you turn up ahead of a meeting and say, I wanted to pre-brief you on this topic because it's quite important, and I wanted to give you a chance to think about it and give me your immediate response, you're treating them as special. They kind of expect to be treated as special, but you're treating them as special. And so always, always, always one-to-one. Because the thing is, if you're doing a presentation that affects them, it's important enough for them to know about. You might get 10 or 15 minutes. It might be, what I would say is, butter up the PAs. PAs are the most important people in your organisation. Because without the PA on your side, you never get to see the director. But I've lost count of the times where, because I got on well with say, the commercial director's PA, I'd say, oh, where is he today? And she'd say, oh, he's back to back. And I said, oh, I really need to speak to him about this. And she'd say, oh, well, he's coming out of this meeting and then he's got to walk across to such and such place. So if you were in this area at about this time, you could bump into him and just say, can I just tell you this while we're walking across? And, if it's important enough, then he stops and he'll be 5 minutes late to the next meeting. So doing it face to face is by far the most effective in our world that we're in today, one-to-one meeting. That makes sense? Perfect. Good. Pre-briefing obviously depends, exactly what you're discussing depends on how far through the program you are. So if you're close to the end, you may have some slides. Remember, you've got rule of 3. If you're going to have 5 or 6 minutes talking to them, that means you have 2 slides. You're walking along. You don't want to be sorting bits of paper. So you might have a slide that you're saying, this is kind of a key finding. I could tell you why, but we haven't got very long, so I just wanted to share the finding, and then blah blah blah. If you're partway through a bigger project and you found out something unexpected, it may be more fluid. You may not have actual slides or dashboards or anything to show them. You might have something that was you might draw it on a whiteboard. That's hugely effective. It looks spontaneous, but as long as you've planned out how you want to tell the story, it's massive, because you can say, well, we were going in this direction, but actually this and this and this are happening, and this is crowding out this bit. You can rub that bit out for impact. It depends on what you're trying to communicate, depends on the circumstances of communicating it, but what you're going for here is, I'm alerting you to this thing you need to think about, and whatever it is that makes you pay attention to that is the right answer. I think an email, best one in the world. I mean, how many emails do you guys get? 50, 100, 200 a day? I don't know. They get 3 times that. More importantly, their PA filters stuff out. So if you're going to email, it's important and important enough for the end reader, and they have to read it in time. And if you send an email, you lose control of that. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. That answers that question. It's true anywhere in the organisation at any seniority, it just becomes time scarcity is worse at senior levels. You have to be even more focused. Mouse, sorry, I've got 2 mice. I've got a home mouse and a work mouse. I was frantically moving the wrong way. Yeah, rank times IQ is a constant. My old boss, probably 25 years ago, when we were sitting, he was junior, I was even more junior because he was my boss, and we were complaining about something that senior managers had done. And he said, well, you just have to remember that rank times IQ is a constant. And the more senior you are, I've moderated that over the years as I've become more senior. What I would say is rank times. So the more senior you are, the more things you have to worry about, the less time you have to worry about each individual thing. So if you're talking to, I don't know, the person who runs, all of the housekeeping projects and programs, that's the thing they're worried about. They worry about all of that sort of stuff. If you're talking to them about that sort of topic, it's really relevant. If you're talking to the CFO has to worry about everything. And so you've got to be extremely concise, very much to the point. And you've almost got to say, well, if I'm lucky enough to get half hour with the CFO, that means I only want to present for 15 minutes because the whole point of getting in the same room is to get them to speak. I'm probably only going to get 20 minutes. So that means I've only got 10 minutes of presentation time, so I've only got 3 slides. Unless I can come up with a trip to an eco village to engage with the whole problem. So bear in mind, the more senior your stakeholder, the less time they have for your specific thing, even if you know it's really important. So the other thing is that you're really good, you're being really inconvenient. I said being a terrorist was a lot of fun. Well, yeah, it is until somebody has to deal with the fact you blew up their bridge. Halfway through the year, you're saying, oh, don't do this, do something else. That's a real nuisance because now I've got to change my budgets, I've got to change my direction, I've got to change how processes work. I might have to go and negotiate with a union or something to change a process. It can start and end activities. It's great when something new comes up, something exciting that people are allowed to go off and grow the business into. But sometimes you'll do a piece of analysis that takes somebody's job away. So I did a piece of work looking at call center outsourcing. And they'd moved a whole bunch of call centers from the UK to India. It was obviously people lost their jobs. That wasn't my piece of analysis. The rework was huge. And actually the rework was done onshore. And the analysis that I did basically said it's not cost effective to offshore. The saving you get from being in an Indian call center plus the rework is it all cancels out. You'll be better off bringing things back onshore. And so the board made that decision. And yes, it's great. So people in the UK got jobs, but people in India lost their jobs. And that was off the back of our piece of analysis. So, the fact that the organisation is saving a bit of money is great. Somebody's paying the price for that. So, managing the message, you have to make sure that you respect all of the stakeholders. We talk a bit about stakeholders in that case study, and yes, it is Bob and the kids. What about his employees? We didn't talk about that, did we? We talked about the community. We worked with, and have worked with for many years. So, it pays to think this thing through, and I've seen too many side decks that are a bit triumphant sometimes. And you think, yeah, there's a person on the other end of that statement. There's a customer whose service experience is going to be diminished, or a member of staff is going to lose their job. So I would say be respectful of your fellow people, but more specifically, remember that your recommendation may be right, but you need to package it so that it has the right outcome. Yeah, so your most imaginative, your most far-reaching, your most incisive thought is always going to be great, but it's always going to be the hardest thing for your audience to take. And the easiest thing for them to say is, "Oh, it's too low priority." So don't give them that opportunity unless it really is too low priority. That comes back to the value. And my caution would be, please be very careful when you try and jump somebody in a chain of command. Because you will all know someone who is just a bit annoying. They don't ever believe you when you present. They never do anything. Or they draw the wrong conclusion every time, no matter how clear you are. Go to their boss, you have burned that bridge forever. I sat in a doctor's surgery once and I was looking at a poster and it left a lasting impact on me. It was actually about domestic abuse, but the little, the hardest thing is to know which bridges to cross and which ones to go over somebody's head. Our work relies on people trusting and respecting how even handed this now. Your regardless of what else we say. We talked about meetings, audio conversations. Oh, I just talked about
Sound, Stuart, can't hear you.
right. How about that? Is that better? I pull the little thing out and push it back in again and twiddle it, and I don't know what effect that has, but it clearly works. But I was just saying, I've mentioned all this stuff. It's almost like I've been here before. So good, excellent. Oh yeah, I forgot about this. So my confidence tripped me up. We are people of detail. We worry about the details of things. We think about the little bits of code we've had to write and the impact that that's had. So we put in caveats because they make us feel better. What do caveats do to the audience? Destroys confidence. When you call it a caveat or an assumption or something to be aware of, they just see you writing a slide which could be entitled "Covering My Own Arse." Because what you're saying is, well, this is true, but that gives them an excuse to ignore it. That means that you've reduced the confidence that they have by having a slide of caveats. Now, if it's a really important caveat, like this only applies to customers aged under 30, then there is nothing wrong with putting that in. But if you have a slide's worth of caveats, even at the end, then what it says is you're not really that confident. The fact that you're presenting it to your stakeholder should be a mark of your confidence. If you were not confident in it, you should not have been presenting it. So if you've got some internal quality assurance, then you've got your list of caveats, share them with the person doing the QA. But then delete it from your deck. Because if they pass your caveats and say they are reasonable, then they're reasonable. So, big, important caveat, yes. Everything else, no. Put it in your project documentation somewhere. Doesn't need to come outside the team. You are the expert presenting. They need to trust you when you talk about the findings. They need to trust that if you weren't confident, you wouldn't present that finding. Or that you would say, actually, this thing's true. I'm not 100% convinced that you should act on it. So actually, what I have is this alternative thing that you should do. Bear this in mind. I wanted to tell you about this, but this is the thing I'm more confident about. So that's the way of managing caveats. It is just, otherwise you're a person who wants to ignore you. They will. Yeah, we've talked about. Oh, clip art. You know, I see less clip art now than I used to. Uninstall it. Never use clip art. Particularly those little stick figures. Oh God, there was a phase where they were everywhere. Be imaginative. Yes, of course, be imaginative. Using clip art is not. When I very first started work, people did reports. They would type them up actually in those days, but then they went on to Word. And you couldn't get anything done unless you had a big report. Banks maybe are worse at this. You know, you had to have a whole document, project initiation documents and all sorts. That's all gone now. People's attention span is just less. So I mean, I don't think anybody ever used to read them anyway. Somebody had to write them sometimes. So I would say I'd be surprised if writing a long document is the right answer. Having said that, we did recently do some work for a guy who ran an analytics team at one of the UK banks. And we knew he was an academic by background, and he'd sort of moved across from academia into commerce. And so we took a considered decision to write him a pseudo-academic paper with references and everything else, because our judgment was that he might read it. And actually he did, so that was good, so it worked. But generally speaking, you know, you're back to this thing of, I've got 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And remember that a lot of people are seeing your results on their phone. How big is your phone? How much detail are you really going to get on there? So, particularly if you're sending dashboards, you have to think really carefully about what it is you want people to do. It's not, oh, I've produced a dashboard. It's, I've produced a dashboard, and this is the thing that you need to do as a result of me doing it. If you're presenting something, obviously you're presenting it, but if you're emailing it through as a response, they're going to read it on their phone. So, what works? I'm a geographer by background. Maps work. Why do maps work? I would do this as an open shout out, but I won't now, just for the in the interest of the format. Because you colour them in bright colours. And like bees, we are keyed to bright colours. Does pay to check whether your stakeholder's colourblind. One of mine was colourblind, and I kept forgetting. And I don't say here's the red bit, and I don't know which one that is. But bright colours, you know, forget the corporate palette. That's the enemy of anything. You know, it's like it's going to be purple and grey or something. I don't know, whatever it is. You know, it's don't have that. Have bright green, bright red, bright yellow. They're the colours that stand out for people. The other thing that you can do with maps is you can find out where is local to the person who you're presenting to. And there is nothing stronger than management by anecdote. So we did a thing about years ago now about cash machines. About I was working at Nationwide at the time. They had a cash machine at a yacht club down on the south coast. Only there because the chairman was a member of the yacht club, and somebody had said, "Oh, it was so convenient if we had a cash machine to use in the bar." And so he said, "Oh, I can sort that out." So he had, but of course it was massively unprofitable, and we wanted to get rid of it. So, you know, we had to go up and say we're going to get rid of it. The person who we were presenting to said, "Well, yeah, but that's there because of the chairman." We said, "Well, show him this map." So we showed him a map. We did a map of all of the cash machines in the area and how busy they were. And of course, this one was only ever used by members of the yacht club who frankly, a lot of them had more money than sense anyway, so they didn't need a lot of cash. You know, they just set up the tab at the end of the month. But because we were saying we're trying to get rid of all of the low usage, what we did was said we're trying to get rid of all of the low usage cash machines because they're unprofitable. Here's an example. And we didn't say we know that this is the chairman's yacht club. We just said, here's an example, it's Dorset, or whatever it was. And we had all of these, and there was one that was an anomaly in the middle. And so, of course, when it got presented, he said, well, which is that one? And they said, oh, it's at a yacht club, I think. He's like, oh, right, yeah, I know which one that is then. Yeah, we should probably get rid of it. So, if it's something local, people get it. They manage by it, don't they? They say, oh, yeah, this accords with my reality. I accept what you say. And Excel, by which I mean any presentation of numbers, really. You shouldn't. Just please don't. Because people don't like numbers. Even people who say they like numbers often don't like numbers. We like numbers because that's what we are. We are numbers people. They don't. So if you can hide numbers in any way, then hide them. Even charts, people struggle to digest. They just don't understand them. It's weird. These other people, they just don't get it. So remember, you're trying to get your audience to do something. Make it in the right format. More numbers are not more truth for those people. For us, if you show me two numbers that say the same thing, I become a little bit more convinced. They don't. They were starting to disengage with the first number, and then you showed them another number, and now they're fully disengaged. If you tell them something that's true and show them the picture of a little flower, they're probably equally happy. So we're doing a big flower because our customers say that the bed linen smells nice when they're getting. We're not saying it's 23%, more appreciated. We're just saying they like this stuff, use more of this. If you feel an utterly overwhelming requirement to produce lots of numbers, what I'd suggest is print them out into a nice, handy booklet, get to the end of your presentation, and then see if anybody asks for the nice handy booklet, because you'll only print it out a couple of times because you're doing it on your home printer at the moment, and nobody will ever want them, and you'll think, well, that was a complete waste, and I've just paid for the ink and the paper, and then you'll stop doing it. You don't need the numbers. You're selling the analysis, not the numbers. Really general. So you remember I said we only had 6 slides in a half-hour presentation. At most, if you've got an introduction and a conclusion, then that gives you about 4 slides. If you have more than one number on each slide, you lose control of what people remember. Because you've got the number 6 and number 14. I'm only going to remember one of those. You then give me 3 more slides. I've got 6 numbers. On top of those 2, I'm only going to remember one of them. It's a bit like if you've ever listened to the radio for weather forecast. Just before 6 o'clock, they do the weather forecast and they read it out. And I'm a geographer. I know where these places are. I'm interested in the weather because I go outside. But I can't pay attention to it. My brain just slides off the forecast, and I end up with like one fact about maybe wind speed in 40s, which is no use to me at all because I don't live near there. I wanted to know what it was like in East Midlands. So you do that to people when you put lots of numbers in. You're trying to prove your point, but actually that's not what they take away. So 1 point per slide maximum. And actually, there's a thing that I like to think of, which is the killer slide, which is if you could only have one slide that contained the essence of what you were doing, and it's the one that you want to say to people, remember this. Even if you don't remember anything else, remember this, then that you need to design that into your story. So if you have one number, make it count. Yeah, so recommendations. I think we've talked about value enough that you've got the point there. If you're going to access value, you should have a recommendation from your analysis. If you don't have any recommendations, you haven't finished, or you haven't done a very good job. If your recommendation is to do more analysis, get this, you also haven't finished. So you should always get to the end of the analysis and say, well, actually, as a result of the things I've learned, I think we should do this. Now, you may have a discussion with other people about whether that's a good idea or not, but you should always at least come out with a recommendation. If there's more than one, that's great. If there's fewer than one, then you've wasted your time. Yeah, we talked about financial benefit. Ah, yes. So year-end reviews. There's always a problem with managing analysts, which is, how do you know a good analyst? Now, I feel like I know a good analyst when I see one. But at the end of the year, there's, you've got your performance review, you've got a certain number of good ratings and a certain number of kind of, let's call them standard ratings. And there's a quota. It doesn't matter what people say. You can't have 9 out of 10 people in your team with a good rating and 1 with a standard rating. That isn't how it works. So you have to somehow be able to rank people. And if the reason that we're here is to do good analysis that is adopted by our stakeholders, then if you have a list of the times that you made recommendations that had value, that were taken up, then what you're starting to do is demonstrating your value as an analyst, which is all good target meeting information for the end of the year. Because you can then say, well, I've generated change worth £6 million this year. And suddenly it becomes a league table. And whilst I don't say you have to be competitive, actually year-end reviews are slightly competitive because there are only a certain number of bonus points available, for promotion, for a year-end bonus, if any of us are lucky enough to get one of those this year, just for pay rise, if any of us are lucky enough to get one of those this year. So it's a way of quantifying your contribution that you should remember. Because the other thing is, by the end of the year, you won't remember what you did in January, and certainly your manager won't, unless it was a real awful disaster. You don't want to be remembering that. Oh, I mentioned the killer slide. Yeah, we talked about that. Failures. Yeah, and I said about the one number, it's the one message, whatever it is, they'll only remember one thing. So make sure that you choose which one they remember. The way I generally get to this is I like to tell a story. So for me, presenting is telling a story. And if you've only got half an hour, you're telling a short story. And if you've got an hour and a half, you're telling a long story, but you are telling a story. So I tell my story and then I go back and I look for the killer slide. The one slide that I'd say, if I only got 2 minutes, this is it. If I can't find it, it isn't there. And I have to go back and put it in because I've missed it. And I do that fairly often. So the other question is, if I've found it and I've got it, am I proud of it? Because maybe it is the one slide I'm going to present, because I might not need the others. There was the kind of 3 slides, 6 slides thing. Well, actually, if I've got one and it does all the work, do I need the others? And that raises the bar for the other slides. It says these have got to do something special to help the killer slide, because otherwise they're not in. So I'm not writing 87 slides because 86 of them, what they're going to do is that'll be, you won't be able to see the wood for the trees. So anyway, killer slide, make sure you've got one. Make sure you go looking for it. And we're 5 minutes adrift, but I think that's okay. So we're going to take a break. And you guys are going to go back into your teams. Same teams as before, same Teams or Zoom or whatever you use. So we are now in the world where you've got belief that you agree. You've done the analysis, so you're going to have to imagine that. You can imagine anything you like. It's entirely up to you. You can imagine that King's Lynn has been, I don't know, burnt down in a fire. It doesn't really matter what you imagine. It's up to you. So that's your creative juices flowing there. So you need to convey your recommendations. You need to lay out the options if you're laying out options, but also the consequences, the value, effectively. Now, the value for Bob may not actually be entirely financial. What I would say to you, you need to think about is if Bob is thinking about retiring, small business owners tend to have their pension fund is really their business. So when you're making stuff up, you need to decide whether that's true or not, or whether he's made independent decisions. And if he hasn't, then how do you factor that in? Because obviously Bob wants a long and happy retirement when he gets there. So have a bit of a think about that. I think if we come together at 11:45, that gives people a time for a little bit of a screen break. And then, I don't know, 40 or 45 minutes together. I'll leave you guys to decide how you want to do that. I'm also going to have a little screen break, but I will stay in the room here if you're stuck and you need anything. But I am actually going to have a drink and a little break because, like you, I need one. Plus, I've been talking and you haven't. So if we're all okay, if I don't see you in the next 40 minutes or so, I will see you at 11:15. If we can all be back for 11:15. Well, let's not worry too much then about that. We'll just have to tell him what he missed out on. So, right. Now then, debrief. Now, I forgot to say this when I sent you all away, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Because I was going to say, oh, you could do some slides if you wanted to, or something like that. Normally in the office, you see, we do like a little flip chart, and people let their inner artist out onto the flip chart. So we can't do that today. I forgot to say to you, do you want to do slides? If you do, that's up to you. So this bit's going to be a little bit more freeform than it normally is. So we're going to start with team 3 this time, on the basis of the one who was last shall be first, which means that team 2, you have middle child syndrome, I'm afraid. This is what my daughter calls it. So who wants to go first? So who's talking on team 3? And do you want to seize control of the screen and have a little PowerPoint?
Yeah, I'm just going to share our PowerPoint.
Line them for a minute. There we go.
You see my screen?
Even the little thing that says customize your view.
So what we found from our project, after doing some research, we found that the staycation industry was actually booming quite a lot due to the pandemic, and people are moving away from residency and towards the...
Jasmine, can you, now I'm getting the other side of this. Can you lean a little bit forward towards your mic?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so we found from our research that the staycation industry is booming during the pandemic. So people are moving away from permanent residency and towards leisure market. And there's been a higher demand for family breaks. So that's our findings.
So our recommendations are that any properties that Bob's business goes on to build in the future should be family and kid friendly, and ideally within walking distance of key attractions such as the beach and the arcades at Hunstanton. The analysis has we've come up with a figure which is a potential revenue opportunity of an additional 5 million if Bob was to go down this route.
There are some, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
That's good to know. There are some implications though that do come with this. We're going to need to consider marketing and branding to attract local landlords. Obviously, Bob doesn't have these connections right now, so it's something he'll need to work on and build on to make sure he knows he's in the right industry. Also, because it's a conversion from the selling properties to selling, leisure places to stay, we're going to need to look to invest in safety regulations, as this will differ between the two types of properties.
Yeah, so that's all.
Excellent. Excellent. Nice and clear. Nice and concise. Thank you very much. Well, we'll hold discussion until the end, because otherwise we get the same problem we had with the last group. So thank you for that. So team 2, what do you want to do? Are you going to amaze us through the art of dance or mime?
Chris should be like sharing his screen soon. Hopefully, if his internet works.
Otherwise, interpretive dance it is.
It will have to be.
This is where Chris turns off his camera.
Oh no, he's actually lost internet.
Oh dear. Sit around and wait for it to come back. It's funny how stuff gets back into it sort of makes its way into the English language. So the whole next slide, please. And you're talking, you're on mute, and oh no, the internet's gone.
Sorry, I'm back. Let me try that again.
Hey, you're much clearer on this new thing that you're back on. Whatever that is, stay there.
Restarted the web page. It just doesn't seem to want to connect me to my desktop. I can't share anything.
Oh, interpretive dance. So, Chris. Hey, starting to share. Oh,
Is that working?
I heard that. 2 birds managed to hit the window simultaneously then. I don't think sparrow brains are very large.
Okay,
Excellent. Yes, we can see your findings. Yes.
Oh, thank God. Right. So our findings were similar, but along a slightly different tack to the previous group. So we're focused more on Bob moving into the rental properties, but based mainly towards the aging population. So there's still lots of rapidly developing business in the area, which is good. But as there's an increasing aging population, the new property should be more geared towards the assisted living facilities and the rental properties for retirees. There is the potential for the business as is to carry on in the short term, as there's currently a requirement for 3,000 homes. And we also found in our findings and in our assessments and interviews with the local community that Bob the Builder has a good quality of houses, and everyone likes that. So our recommendations is that Phil and Sue should continue to build housing at the high quality that's there, to kind of keep the good relationships with the community and keep the business at a high level. He should be exploring best possible locations in the area to kind of build housing where the demand is needed. As I've mentioned, the findings that the assisted living and retirement properties, this will allow Bob to have a steady flow of income to supplement new houses being built as well, which will help in his retirement plan, so that there won't be any extra kind of loss if he's taking sort of a pension out. And the implications, so sustainable finances for the short term. We're strengthening his position because we're adding an extra finance option. If everything is successful and the quality stays high, this can lead to a legacy business with which could be handed through to the next generations of his family. And then obviously the implication of if the recommendation isn't followed, there's a potential threat to the business, because the capacity of new houses is only 3,000. we've got no indication about whether that'll be increased. So there is the potential for no new homes to be built after 2026.
Excellent, good. Completely different direction. This is what consulting is all about. You have two recommendations with the same base information, but completely different directions. And let's see if we can complete the set. Thank you, Chris. It was lovely to see you in high definition briefly there. And team one. So
Yeah,
last but not least.
yep, I'll share my screen. Let me know if that's worked.
Hey, we have a picture of
Can you see the right screen? So the orange.
See all your analysis.
yeah, I suspect that as you're
Oh.
amongst friends, that's fine, but
Okay.
sharing them okay.
1 second. 1 second.
This
Let's try
table is a map
again.
and a bar chart. Yes, I think that's a much better idea.
Oh, I don't actually know how to use this.
If it's any consolation, I just share my whole screen and then just close all the things I
Yeah,
don't
that's
want to
probably
share.
what I should have done. 1 second. I can't see.
The other thing I've learned over the years is technology has got cleverer than I am, so I just revert to the simple stuff. I know you can do loads of things with it, but I don't know how.
I can't like unshare. I don't know where that option is. I'm really confused. It's just I can just see like a smaller.
I'll tell you what. I'll start to share again, and then
Okay.
that'll kick you off, and then you can come on. Yeah?
Okay.
And then I will stop sharing again. Okay, how to stop sharing? There it is, that button, isn't it? Oh, we use Teams. I've got used to.
Can you see now?
Yes.
Right.
How is houses?
Okay. Great. Okay. So okay, so first of all, key findings. So obviously, so we found that Kings Lynn has the greatest potential compared to the surrounding areas, as property growth is needed and planned for in this area. The type of housing should be developed with young people in mind in the long term, but in the short term, retirement homes would be a good investment as they have outperformed the market recently. Market research has shown that the community supports the developments within the area, especially brownfield sites and retirement homes. Our recommendations. So first recommendation, to stay within Kings Lynn as there is growth within this market. Second, utilize existing land that the business currently owns. And third one, so use Kings Lynn as an avenue to start exploring property management. Number 4, prioritize development of retirement homes in the short term. And our implications. So when implementation within Kings Lynn is successful, the business will be diversified into property management and development, which will help to mitigate risk. Property management will provide a steady income stream, as property development is likely to have peaks and troughs. And that's it.
Thank
Now
you.
I don't know how to stop sharing.
Now we're going to leave you like this forever. Just be stuck here for the rest of eternity.
The screen has gone really small, and for some reason I can't have any option. There we go.
There we go. So you should be safe now. Now I've lost the little chat box, and I don't know where that's gone. Is over there, just to make sure that I can see you. Right, excellent, thank you. So I like the fact that those of you who had maps. So proves that at least some of the sound was working at some of the time. So good. All nice and clear and simple, because you only got 3 slides. No numbers except for the value number from team 3. Possibly slightly further over to that extreme than I was expecting, but you know, it's good. It's good. Was that working together? Writing, you know, effectively writing the presentation together. Was that something you normally do? Do you normally do that on your own? Is it easier with a group? Yeah. So as with the brief, there's no reason at all why you can't sit down with your team and say, I've got this story to tell and I need, you know, let's work out how to tell it. I would observe that people have different levels of both artistic skill and the ability to summarize, let's put it like that. You know, somebody will look at you'll explain it and they'll go, oh, so it's this. And you go, yes, that's exactly it. And that's your one slide. I work with a guy here at Teradata, and he's excellent at that. You know, he's a salesman, so I guess he has to be. But I'll sort of explain something, and he'll say, "Okay, so you need to tell them this then." And he'll summarize 3 slides in one sentence. So working together is good. Do more of it. It's more difficult virtually, but we've just proved that you can do it. So why not? When you were thinking up what it was you'd analysed, how easy was that? Making stuff up. Was that liberating or difficult? Thumbs up if it was easy, thumbs down if it was a bit tricky for you. Oh, an interesting balance there. So, there isn't a right answer, by the way. Yeah, lots of assumptions. But that's okay, because that's making stuff up. That's good. You're all right with that. I think what I would observe is we've done this loads of times. We've had dozens of different ideas. We've had sort of people saying, "Oh, you know, Phil's a gambler, and he, you know, they need to cut him out of the business, or they need to pay off his debts and stuff like that." Part of the reason for doing it this way is just to give you a bit of practice in being a bit more creative, because the idea that there's one, I mean, you know, numbers can tell you anything. The more imaginative, the more creative that you are, the more interesting your analysis will be for the reader. And actually, do you think you needed more than 3 slides? Not really. So you've also had practice in doing 3 slides worth of work. And the essence of a good project is not how long you spend on it, it's how effective it is. So if you can do 3 slides, get your whole message across, it almost doesn't matter what the message is. With Bob, you've got a little scenario, but really the lesson is about working together and being succeeding. So, and imaginative. So we're in the end game now. Sadly, I cannot promise you the same special effects as you would get in Avengers, but we are in the end game. So we've done that bit. This is a slightly blocky picture. But this is a little boy. Sorry for the quality, but it's quite an old photo. It just didn't blow up particularly well. We're going to have a little game now. I normally do this earlier, but we're going to do it towards the end, just to sort of build on that creativity. And for those of you who thumbs down and found it difficult, we're going to do this and see if it gets a little bit easier. Because I think your imagination is a bit like a muscle. I think the more you use it, the easier it gets to be imaginative, the better you are at being imaginative. I mean, I came to that when I first met you.
Sound's gone, Stuart.
Is that working now? Yep, I'm back again. I pulled it out, turned it off and turned it on again. So what I was saying was I I realised that imagination was something that you could improve when I had the kids, and I was telling them stories. And the more I told them stories, the easier it got. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend, I don't know, 20 minutes telling the story of this little boy's life. I will say it's a little boy just in case, you know, sometimes these old photos, it's a bit difficult to tell. Normally when I do this, we do like a little shout out. So what we'll do is get your typing fingers ready, and we're going to tell his life story, but we're going to start with his name. So I want you just to think about what this little boy's name is likely to be. Type something in. Thank you. Anyone else? Wesley. He looks like Wesley. He's definitely not a Boris. We're definitely not having that. No politics in this classroom. I think we're going to go with Jack. Thank you for those little ideas. So, what year? When we can either go for what year he was born, or how old he was in this picture and when the picture was taken. So let's go for what year he was born. So what year do you reckon this Jack was born? And again, got some suggestions in. One of the things I love is that the younger my audience gets, the more recent the years get. So I get an insight into what people think is old. So where have we got? We've got everything from 1920 to 1959. I think about 1950 as an average. So that would make him okay. He's 70-ish, give or take now. If you had to summarise his childhood in 3 words, words too easy, but 3 words, how would you summarise his childhood? Any 3 words that you like. You can use the 3 to summarise your childhood. I don't know. You may reveal more than you meant to. Isn't it? It's not a trick though, by the way. Come on. 2 words then. I'll lower my opening bid. Yeah. 2 ends of the spectrum. The bias here to a happier childhood. The advantage with this is I can see when you haven't done it. So those of you who haven't done it yet, sit here as long as you like. I go on holiday after this. I haven't got to go back to the office. I've just got to pack the car. So oh. What if Chris has revealed any dark secrets? I hope you've got 9 brothers and sisters, Chris. That's more or less everybody. Happy and boring. We'll get you imagining things. What would your cat say about their life? Happy and boring. Right. Okay. So I think we've got a bias towards a happy childhood here. Now, that was not a trick question, by the way. You could have said any 3 adjectives; it would have been fine. So I'm going to say I'm going to pick I think I'm going to pick Jodie's because got in quick there. Happy, loving, and disciplined. So strict parents, I think we'll say, but happy, loving family, happy childhood. Good scholar or less so in their school life, I think. So I'll settle for good or bad to make it easier for you. Whether you think it's good or bad. Then not a trick.
Can you repeat that, Stuart? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, when did you lose me? I was going to say, is it good or bad at school? I mean, by which I mean academically. Oof, even. I'm going to take that. I'm going to say.
I misspelled, actually.
Hey, no, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with that.
That's a mistake.
No. So what I'm going to say is Michael has anticipated my next question, which was going to say, what did he behave like? I'm going to say that he was quite a bright child, but he messed about. So probably didn't quite meet up his, match his capability to his outcomes. So he ended school maybe not quite as successfully as he should have done, on the basis that Michael's tarred his personality with being a goofball. What sort of jobs do you think he's done over the, let's say his first job and his last job, because of course he's retired now. So what do you think? What he started off and what he finished doing. I don't care if they're connected. They could be the same job. He might have been a bus driver all his life. Oh, he's an artist. Yes. Jenny, it's not hard. Tell me what you wanted to be as a child. Oh dear. I don't understand that. David, I'm sorry, you're off my list. Went to Analyst. So while you're thinking, I used to have somebody work for me who started off in the police, and then he just as a police constable, and became an analyst, and then it transpired that the people in his little squad used to call him college because he was cleverer than they were, which gives me two things to think about. One is an analyst is what you are, not what you do, even if you go into the wrong profession first. And the other is that analysts are cleverer than everybody else. So there you go. Right then, what have we got? Oh, I want to say yes. I really want to say yes, but I'm going to go with mechanic. Starts off as a mechanic. I'm going to say in a garage. But actually, he had an instinctive understanding of machinery, and so went back to university and studied, I don't know, mechanical engineering, something like that. So, good career, quite a settled career, perhaps. Happy childhood. What about his own family arrangements? Married, divorced, children, no children, cats, dogs, carrier pigeons? What do you think? Give me a sense of his family life. Two alpacas. Jahan is being the analyst. I've got a probability here. No wives, 2 children. Oh, oh, there's a dark heart in your team. Concerned about this, children dying of tuberculosis and all sorts. I'm going to married an expert. Yes, Jenny, yes. That's what we're doing. So he married, I'm going to combine two. He married somebody he knew from his childhood. However, and they had two children, twins. But she was subsequently revealed to be an axe murderer. And whilst he was instrumental in getting her arrested for murdering the neighbour with an axe, he had to go into hiding, change his name, and he changed his name to, I'm going to go back up the top here, Wesley. Because why not? Right, okay. So, what's he doing now then? Living as Wesley. And I'm going to say in the West Country now. We didn't really establish where he grew up, but I'm going to say he's in the West Country now. Death by axe. You're dark. You people are dark. And he's doing 10 years to life in prison. Excellent. Still in hiding. Well, one would hope, Jodie, that he is a superhero to his children who clearly saved their lives. Yeah, do you know, I'm still looking for something a little bit. Yes, Bahamas. I like that. We're going with that one. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just disturbed. I think there's probably some HR issues bubbling up here. I may need to cut and paste this chat and send it through to your HR people. It's Friday. Now, this has neatly illustrated what I was hoping it would. So this has actually worked even remotely. So when we started doing the imaginative stuff, first thing, it was quite hard for some of you. We were getting a lot quicker and more imaginative at the end there, weren't we? It gets easier the more you do it. So I would say if you're in the supermarket, if you go to the supermarket, go around, just kind of glance at other people's baskets. Don't be really weird and start rooting through it, because they'll call security. But start to tell yourself the story of their life based on the contents of their basket. So you've been in the supermarket, I'm sure. Full of white bread.
Sorry, can you just repeat that? It went quiet. Thank
you. Right, is that better? Yep, perfect. Weird, isn't it? Technology, eh? So you missed my trolley full of white bread person. You walk around the supermarket, see this person, they've got Tesco, or substitute your preferred supermarket, value bread. And you think, what the hell are you buying that for? It's horrible stuff. And you've got a whole trolley full of it. So 2 things it could be, I suppose, or 3 things. I mean, you might just be strangely attracted to white bread. The first is you might feed the ducks. Now, white bread is not great for ducks. In fact, no sorts of bread is great for ducks. But I suppose if you're a little old lady going down and feeding the ducks, or you've got 19 grandchildren, or whatever it happens to be, maybe you could use a lot of bread. The alternative is you run a sandwich business, but not a really expensive high-end one. Now, the thing is, we haven't even seen the person who's got that trolley. You will have seen them if you've been in there. Tell yourself that story. Tell yourself the story of the person you see walking past in the street, or the person who delivers your Amazon parcel. We've been lucky, we haven't had too many disruptions from that. So those are the sorts of things that will help you practice. Actually, this little boy was my father-in-law. So he was born he have been now? He would have been about 95 now. He's been dead for 9 years. He grew up in the Welsh Valleys, happy childhood. So those of you who don't have a darkness in your soul were correct. He was quite good at school. He wasn't a naughty little boy. At least that's his report of it. So maybe rose-tinted specs. He did indeed go to work and then decide that he wanted to be an engineer. So well done, good. That's exactly what he decided to do. He was a naval engineer though, so to do with basically ships, boats. He did that as his career, and then he moved into investigating accidents and misadventures at sea. And he was the first, after the rescuers, he was the first person on the Herald of Free Enterprise, which, if you have any knowledge of history, at least cross-channel ferry history, it was a ship that was running on the cross-channel and they forgot to shut, or they neglected to shut the sea doors when they sailed out of the harbour from France. And of course, the thing with boats is they're supposed to be watertight, and if you don't shut the door, they're not. So it basically water poured on, it capsized, number of fatalities, and it remains the worst cross-channel ferry disaster that we've ever had. But he was the first investigator on board, and when he died and we cleared out the loft, he had all of the paperwork, because it was paper in those days, in a suitcase up in the loft from the inquiry. But he had a happy life apart from that, doing boat stuff. He had 3 daughters. I married the youngest one of them, and he lived a quiet and boring life. So, in some respects, you would say. So, Jenny, actually, not too far from the truth. But when you're telling a story, nobody gives you any points for telling the truth, which is another of those things that I think we've all established. So, anyway, keep practicing the imaginative stuff. Tell yourself the stories. It's really easy to do. The more you do it, the easier it will get. And then when you come to work, you'll find that you can do it in a work context much more easily. That would be my recommendation. Have analyst soul. Right then, last little bit, last 20 minutes or 15 minutes, something like that. So the last little bit of the framework. So we've developed a brief, we've collected some data, we've done some analysis, we've communicated the findings. Now, for a lot of us, that is where the analytic process has stopped. That is not good enough if you have to add value. So you get points for identifying value, but more points for getting it implemented and getting it realised. So you have to have quantified it. This is why we started with that, because it's the last step of the analytical process. You have to be able to argue for priority, because you've got to say, this is worth £20 million. It's important enough that you should do this instead of X. I used to be harsh with my guys in my team, because we started off by adding up the value identified, and we'd come up with this enormous number. At the end of the year, we might have, I don't know, 200 million of value identified. But the only way I could secure my budget for the team for the following year and to invest in cool new stuff like the ability to interrogate security camera video was if I could point at the value that had been delivered. So what I started to do was to not give them credit for coming up with really great ideas that didn't get implemented. The only thing that counted was getting things implemented. And actually what that means is you do less analysis, but you do it for longer. as you carry on into the delivery phase, because people will need their hands held at each point. Because reality is always inevitably slightly different than your recommendation anyway. We might find that, yeah, right, the recommendation was a good recommendation, but we actually can't really do 5% of it. So if we don't do 5%, what does that mean? Well, you need to be there to help them understand what it does mean. They will inevitably, as a project team, run out of budget. When you run out of budget, the first thing you do is reduce the scope of it. And the first thing that gets cut every time is measuring the outcome. So the reason that you need to stay involved is to make sure that the discipline of measuring the outcome is retained, even if you have to do it yourself. There's a little secret a dirty little secret about projects and measuring outcomes, which is if you don't measure it, you don't know if it failed. Sure, you don't know if it succeeded, but you definitely don't know if it failed. And the downside from any project manager's career is that your project fails. So if you don't measure it, you never know. So make sure it's measured. Make sure that you stay engaged. Help people understand and interpret. And of course, situations change. And also make sure that people understand your role. And that's twofold. Typically, when there's a project or something going on, the person who presents to the board gets all the credit, and the earnest analysts in the back room completely forgotten. These people are building their careers, and they want to be chief executive despite the fact they don't know anything, and all of that annoying stuff that you face every day. You know all the stuff, you just don't want to be chief executive, or maybe you do. I don't know. I never did. But it's not wrong to get recognition for playing your part. That helps you personally, but it also helps your team. Because in all big organisations, every year you have to justify your budget. Every year you have to have difficult discussions, even in normal times. So anything you can do to raise your profile, raise your team's profile is important. Helps your career, helps your career development. It opens up new opportunities for you if you want them. Quite a lot of projects, I mean, you'll know this instinctively, but quite a lot of projects get allocated to people because of who they are, not because of how good they are. And what that really means is it's name recognition. So if people have a new project and they're thinking, oh, who could help us with this? They're trying to conjure up a name. Well, if you've got some publicity around a project, that might be your name, and then you might get some interesting work. They may even think to ask you to participate rather than just running off and doing something without any analytical input at all, which is the other thing you're trying to guard against. None of what I'm saying, by the way, should be construed as, you peacocking down the street saying, oh, this only happened because of me. In all big organisations, anything that happens is through the labour of many people. Don't be the person who forgets that. What else should we say? Lessons learned. So I think I said earlier, every time I've done a project, every day I've been to work, I feel like I've learned something, and that hasn't slowed down over the years. The sum of human knowledge is pretty small. The sum of my knowledge is a subset of that. And there's always a new thing to learn. So look for it. Look for the new thing. Sit back at the end of a project and say, have I learned something new? Because if you don't learn new things, you become stagnant in your thinking, you become less employable in the future, and you get bored. And those are all bad things. If you're not learning new things, that's on you, because you can even learn new things when you're doing the same task that you did yesterday. You can make it slightly different, slightly better, or at least experiment with it. Even if it's not better, you'll learn that the thing you tried didn't work. So every project, try and learn one new thing and make a note of what that was in your mind. It's you don't have to make a list. It's just to make sure you've found the thing. So, oh, I've written a new bit of code. I've never tried that before. Somebody taught me this new thing, or I've got this new set of data and I've never used call center data before, but now I have, and actually it's really good. Or, oh, I came up with this suggestion, and when we were talking about it with the delivery team, they said this, and this, and I didn't know how that worked before. Always something new. You learn as much from your mistakes and other people's mistakes as you do from things that worked. But always at least one thing every day. 5 things a week. You can have weekends. So hopefully you will go away.
Really sorry, but your mic's gone. Just the last thing you said. If there's only one thing you remember, and then I didn't hear what you said. Sorry, that may just be me.
Am I back now? Yeah, I'm back now. I forgot what I said now. It's stream of consciousness. Oh no. Yes, I know. I remember. Sorry, I have to go back and rewind in my brain. So for example, if you're thinking about presentations and you learn something about presentations, you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to take my board to an eco village because that'll make a point for me. Whatever it is, doesn't matter. If you have one thing you learned every day, hopefully you've picked up one thing from this course yesterday and one thing today, and that's your quota. Feedback. Who likes getting feedback? Thumbs up if you do, thumbs down if you don't. Who likes getting developmental feedback? Yeah, okay, you're all good. You haven't had a lot. You get a lot less keen on it when you get that. Good. That's a healthy thing. Feedback is a healthy thing. You might as well ask because people think it anyway. Think of it as a piece of data, if you like. If you don't ask, all that means is you don't know what they think. It doesn't change what they think. If they tell you about it, then you have a chance to react. You may choose not to. That's your right. Feedback is a gift. But if you don't ask, you'll never know. And so I always used to say to my team, if I do something that upsets you, tell me. I might do it again, but then you'll know that I'm doing it deliberately. If I don't know, I might upset you again without meaning to. And that's still mostly my fault. But now it's a tiny bit your fault because you should have told me the first time. By the 9th time I've done something, before you explode in my face, ask yourself whether you should have told me any of the other 8 times. So that's one way of getting feedback. Sometimes it's difficult to give feedback to people. If you're not the most sociable person, people may not know how to approach you with a suggestion. You get the best feedback, actually. You know, when you say only a friend could tell you that, it's because they know you and they know what they can do to tell you. So ask for feedback. My experience of feedback is sometimes people tell you stuff you wish that they didn't, but it doesn't make it untrue. I do stuff now that annoys people, and I know that it does, and I've reached a peace with myself because actually it's my personality type. Sorry, it's what you get. Nobody's perfect. But there are other things that I've done to change how I work. So I used to be very quiet in the office, and I would do a lot of thinking. And the feedback I had was it was quite hard to follow my thought process because I just come out with something at the end, and then I'd have to explain how it got there, and that people just found that very difficult. So I started thinking out loud. Now the flip side is now I talk because I'm thinking out loud. But in the right environment, it makes it a much more productive session, and I've learned it makes it much more productive because people can influence my thought process live. So, you know, you'll find different ways of coping, but it's really powerful. What else should I say? This, yeah, from projects, I think at the end of a project, get the stakeholders' evaluation.
You're going again, Stewart.
I'm in the final straight. Is that okay? Right, it's just trying to trip me up right at the end. Sorry about the technical problems. Yes, I was saying at the end of a project, get your stakeholders' assessment of your contribution. Don't ask them about how good the analysis was because they're not going to be able to tell you that. Ask whether you were helpful with good ideas, whether you provided the right level of support to get things executed, whether your recommendations were good ones, that sort of thing, because they'll answer those sorts of questions. If you want an overall score at the end to make it more quantitative, I would suggest you pick a 4-point scale or a 6-point scale. And the reason for that is because if you pick a 5-point scale, they can pick the middle one. If you give them an even number, if they like you, they'll tend to bias upwards. And so you get more goods than satisfactory. So that's just my top tip of managing your senior managers. You can raise your average just by tweaking the rated system. What else do we say? Yeah. Oh, and importantly, and I mentioned this before, projects at the beginning of the year will completely get forgotten. So collect feedback as you go. It is quite disheartening to get to May and November as a manager and get 40 people asking for feedback during the year. You know, the rest of my work doesn't go away at that point. So I'm not going to give 40 people good quality feedback despite the fact they deserve it. If you'd asked, then only would I have given you better. So you've saved me having to do it in a half year, so suddenly I like you more. That's just how it is. So collect your feedback as you go. Don't save it up. There's something called the pick-end rule, which is something I discovered with in a colonoscopy surgery, actually, in that context. It's not surgery, but investigation. What happens is people remember the last thing that happened and the most notable thing.
It's gone again.
Am I back? I don't know what that is. So I pull it out, push it back in again. Story of my life. Yeah, so the peak and the end. So if you don't collect feedback regularly, when you have your year-end review, it will be based on the last project you did and the biggest triumph or disaster from the rest of the year. If you collect feedback on all your projects, it will be a lot more fair. So collect it as you go. You'll make more friends, you'll get more credit. I think that's it. Yes, that's it. And landed within 5 minutes. What did I tell you? So there's my contact details. That's all. Hopefully there was something in there that was useful to you all. Hopefully you had fun as well, because that's part of it. It has been a bit of an experiment doing it remotely. Sorry for the slight technical problem, particularly with my headset. I don't really know why that kept going and coming back. So Jan asked for some feedback on the format of the course as much as anything. I mean, you can give feedback on content as well, of course, but the format is the new thing for us. Yeah, if you want to ask questions, or link in afterwards and have a chat about any topics, quite happy to do that. I am going on a holiday, which actually works in your favour because I can pick up emails. But remember, I do have a day job like the rest of you, so it might be a day or two before I come back to you. On that note, I just say thank you very much for your attention and participation. If anybody got anything they want to ask or say before we finish, otherwise I'll hand over to Jan just to close out, I think.